Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Northwest Blacksmiths Association Knifemaker Corner. Number, what are we at? 6 here. Today's demonstrator is Luke Dellmeyer, and he is going to be demonstrating some of his folder assembly techniques and kind of give us a little rundown of kind of what goes into making a folder and how different they are than kind of some traditional builds. So that you can kind of have a better idea of what's going on when you try and start taking on some of these kind of projects.
How you guys doing? Thanks for having me. Today I'm going to go over how to build a folder, and I think the best way to do it is I have 2 folders that are fully made and functioning, and I'm going to start by disassembling them and going through the process each step by step. The folders that I make presently are liner locks. I don't know how familiar people are with folding knives, but all liner lock means is that we have our scales, we have our bolster, obviously our blade, and then behind the scales, kind of the frame of the knife is the liners, and the liners is what locks our blade in place so it doesn't close. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this apart. This is our pivot. Short socket head screws that hold the bolster. Holding the bolster is the pivot and a short socket screw. And then I have 2 screws that are holding the scales in place. So as I take it apart, I'll explain each step. I'm going to take off the scale first. And guys, real quick, you'll see this as I take the knife apart. There's an A. I always have an A side and a B side to the knife, and I always have 2 little tubs that say A and B, so I don't mess up which parts go where. You guys are going to see there's quite a bit more parts than in a fixed blade.
Is most of the hardware that you're using, is that metric or is that going to be standard?
Most of it's metric, and it's the Torx heads.
Okay.
Like this is a T6 for the short socket heads, and then most of the pivots are a T10.
Oh, sweet. Okay.
All right.
Those are pretty easy.
Now you guys can see I'm gonna put my A scale on this side so I don't lose the parts, and you can see we're getting to the liner, how everything is held together. The A side of the liner is countersunk with an 82-degree countersink, and that's what holds our spacers in place. All right, now on this side of the liner, you can see where we cut the lock in place. Now that we have both scales off, I can remove the bolsters. So put that on our A side. Now you can see the whole liner, and I'm gonna take the bolster off the other one. Put that in our B side. All right, guys, now that we have it apart, you can see the liners. You can see I have an A scribed on one side and a B scribed on the other. And I'm going to disassemble this a little further by taking out our spacers. And then we're going to rebuild this step by step.
Hardin is asking, do you always use screws and not rivets? Like, you ever use rivets instead in certain places?
I don't. I think the rivets are more of like a slip joint. For the liner locks, we take these apart and put them back together by 30 times throughout the build. So it's nice to be able to unscrew it to adjust things.
That makes sense.
All right, guys, so now we have everything apart. I'm gonna pull the liners apart, and you can see inside the liner, we have our cage bearing. We have our liner, our pivot, our blade. That's our cage bearing. And on the other side, we have our stop pin, just 3/32. And then we have our other cage bearing. And then obviously our detent ball. All right, so the first thing I do when I make a folder is I design the folder. A lot of times when I design a folder, what I've been doing lately is I just get a piece of cardboard or filing, like cabinet folder, something that's rigid. And I always design the blade I like. So I'll design the blade first, and then I'll design a handle to fit the blade. And all I do is I just put a pin in here. So that as I close the blade, I can see if this is going to fit inside of the handle. Because remember, we have spacers. So the blade can't go any further than the spacers. You don't want it to hit the spacers. So if you don't have a design already, another way to get a design is just to take apart a folder you have and try to make it that way. But if you don't have one and you want to make your own, a great way to do it is just out of cardboard, put a piece of pin in there, and you can use that as your pivot to see how that's going to open and close. Once I have my design, I always make a permanent template once I know it works, and I never use this one. This is just a piece I use to make all my designs. I buy my titanium, so you guys know, from American Metal Exchange. It's a great company. They have all kinds of different titanium, zirconium, and they have tons of stuff. The size I have right here is 0.065. I use 0.065 and I use 0.071 for the liners. So I take my template. You can see I kind of traced it onto here for you guys. I lay it down, I clamp it, I trace around it, and I'll do 2 of them, obviously. Then I'll cut them out. And guys, I did all this before the demo, just because I want to try to explain the whole process. I'm going to show you all the tooling involved and how I do it each step. So once I get these all cut out, then what I'll do is I'll take the liners, clamp the template to the top of the 2 that I just cut out. And I like to use these no twist clamps. And I'll clamp all of them together. And then I'll grind the 2 liners to my template. And once I have everything ground and fit, the next thing I do is I drill my pivot. So on my template, my pivot hole is already established. It's a 3/16 pivot hole. And I'll grab a 3/16 pivot. Like I said, I pre-drilled this so that we didn't waste time. But this would go in through 1 liner and it would stop on the next 2. And the reason I do that is once it's sitting on there, I take a 3/32 drill bit, which fits perfectly inside of this collar, to find the center. This is important that we find center on all these so that everything meets up equally. So then I'll drill through both liners with that in place. And once I get drilled through with the 3/32, then I go to a number 14 drill bit, which is just a hair smaller than 3/16. I drill completely through with the number 13. Once I get through with the 13, then I grab a 3/16 reamer. And for those of you that don't know what a reamer is a precision 3/16 bit. So I'll ream out the hole to 3/16. Then I'll put my pivot in place to hold it. Like I said, I already drilled this. And then once that's through, I'll go back under the drill press and I will drill my 3/32 stop pin through the liner. And once I have my pivot drilled and my stop pin, I'll put both those in and I'll leave the clamps in place. And then the next thing I do is I drill all my small holes. And these holes do several different things. Some hold the spacers and others hold our bolsters in place and our scales. And the A side is different from the B side, if that makes sense. When I disassembled this, our A side sits on top, while the spacers between. Our B side is the back side where we're going to cut our lock like this. And our A side, I drill all these holes with a number 53 drill bit first. I should have said that earlier. I drill all these with a number 53 drill bit. Then after they're all drilled with the number 53, I have 3 holes that I need to open up for clearance for the spacers. This one here, this one here, and this one here. So I open that up to a size 49, just so I have room for the flatheads. And then I use an 82-degree countersink to open it up until the flatheads sit flush with the liner. Next, I go back and I open up the rest of the holes that I haven't yet, except for the stop pin and the pivot. I open 1, 2, 3. I open those to a number 51 on the A side, and I open all the holes on the B side. All these stay at a size 51, and we're leaving those at a 51 so that we can tap them. That's the perfect size for a 1 by 72 tap. And when I first started making folders, I thought I needed a Tapmatic to tap these liners, which is expensive. They're like $600 or $700.
Is that the
And
head
then,
that's in the drill press?
yeah, let me show you. It's one of these that goes in your drill press. It auto reverses.
Yep.
They're very expensive, but then I learned from a friend of mine, Mike Tyree, who also taught me how to make the folding knives, that if you get a drill, you can just use a hand drill. And I didn't tap these yet, so I can show you guys that you can do this pretty easily without snapping your bit. What you want to do is you want to set your drill pressure way down. So you tighten your tap up, then put your drill pressure all the way down. So it slips as soon as you put pressure on it. That way you don't snap your tap. I'm going to show you guys how easy it is. I'm not going to tap all of them, just so you have an idea. Reverse, but you can see how easy it goes in.
Wow.
So you can save yourself about $700.
That's wild.
Yeah, as long as you take your time and set your slip on your drill press the right way.
I would have never thought you could do that.
Yeah, it's almost faster than this Tapmatic. But you guys see, it's a walk in the park.
Wow.
So if you're already a knife maker and you have most of your tools and you don't want to spend $700 on a Tapmatic, if you have a drill press, a handy little drill, you just use that.
That is a slick trick. I like that.
All right. So our B side is all number 51 drill with a 1 by 72 tap. Our A side has 3 number 51 holes that are tapped 1 by 72. The 3 other holes on the A side, we drilled out to a size 49 for clearance. Then we used the countersink, an 82-degree countersink to flip our flatheads in, which I'll show you on the finished one. This is our A side, and these are, I can get one out of here. These are the flathead screws that I use. Put that in. And you guys can see it sits flush. So it's not in the way of our scale. Hold the spacers in place. And with this side doesn't need to be tapped. That's why it's a clearance hole. It threads into the B side, which is tapped. Does that make sense?
Total sense.
Luke, I have a question.
Yeah.
Those spacers you were talking about now, are those dictating the thickness of the blade and the depth of the bearing pockets? That's something I've always wondered, because you're not changing the spacer size, right? The back spacers?
I do change the spacer size. What I do is I keep a lot of my blades roughly the same size, but we want 20 thousandths bigger than our blade size. So say we're using spacers that are, I believe these are 160. These spacers that I took off that knife.
Okay.
So these are 160 thousandths. So we want to shoot for 180. That's a space that, or I'm sorry. Yeah, these are 160, so our blade width should be 140. 20 thousandths is the magic number that we want the spacers bigger than what the blade is. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, that does. Thank you. That was my question. I was just wondering if you changed those much, or if you just kept the spacers the same and let them dictate the blade size, kind of, which makes sense to me. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I use pretty much the 160s and 180s, to be honest. I like, it's a nice size blade at that point. It's not too heavy and it's not too light, in my opinion. So I use 160s and 180. And you can also put these on your surface grinder if you have one. If you want to get, if you have an odd size blade, you can always surface grind them down to the exact size you want as well.
Okay.
Luke, do you have a background in machining at all, or are you self-taught with all your machining that you're doing? With
No, I'm self-taught. I went through a lot of struggles. I do have a friend down the road who's about 85, and he's been a machinist his whole life. So when I really mess something up, I just go to him, or if I have a question, and he makes it look easy.
That's a good
But
thing to have.
yeah, I went out and bought I found a mill, a Bridgeport mill for, believe it or not, $500 as a machine shop. And my friend helped me.
You dog.
Yeah. And my friend helped me rebuild it because that's what he did for a living, rebuild them. So we rebuilt it. And yeah, I lucked out. I have the big Bridgeport, then I have a little mini mill too, which is super handy for doing stuff right around my little work table. This is where I'm always putting stuff together.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've seen those mini mills before. If someone didn't want to go the full route of going with like a BP or like an email or something like that, which generally are going to run around $3 to $4 grand, used in good condition right now, is a mini mill capable of running a knife like this, or do you think that you could or could not do it with just the mini mill?
No, you can do everything on a mini mill for sure.
Nice.
I mean, I have both set up for different purposes, but a friend of mine does everything on a mini mill, and he makes amazing folders, so it's definitely not a problem. All right, so next thing we're gonna do is, if we put bolsters on, the next thing we would do is we would make our bolsters. So what I would do is I would take one of my liners, and I'd cut the bolster material, whether we're using Damascus or this one here is zirconium. And zirconium is pretty cool. This is what zirconium looks like before you do anything with it. We sand it down to about 1200, and then we bring it to a red, and then we quench it and it turns black. But
wow.
Zirconium is very dangerous too. It's very explosive and can instantaneously combust. So it's something you want to be careful with if you're using it.
Oh, good to know. Yeah. Do you use a respirator with that, or is it more just watching it to make sure it doesn't explode?
No, you definitely want to use a respirator with titanium and zirconium. I mean, even high carbon. But for sure, you want to use a respirator. You don't get a second set of lungs, so it's better safe than sorry. If you're not sure, just wear one.
No.
So next thing I do is I say we're going to use the zirconium. This is a good example. I kind of line it up on the zirconium. I can mark how wide I need it. Roughly, obviously I'd use a square and cut this piece. And then I decide, kind of how I want this bolster to lay. And we'd be using straight edges to get it perfect. I'm just doing it quick for the demo. We'd cut this piece out. And then once it's cut out, I like to use, like I said, these clamps are awesome. These little no twist clamps are amazing. Put one at the top, one at the bottom, hold it in place, flip it over. Once this piece is cut off, and then now that it's clamped, we can drill right through again the same way we drilled for our pivot. We can put this center pin, our pivot collar, in there to find center. It's an easy way to find center. See how it just sits in there perfectly?
Oh, nice.
So that's how you find center. You don't have to center punch it. Use your pivot collar and put a 3/32 bit in there. It comes down to find your center every time. Then once you find center, take it off and drill it out with your, your number 14 bit, and then ream it. And then once you have your pivot in place, the pivot will hold this from swinging this way. You take the clamp off up here, and then we drill through this small tap. This hole is tapped, so we want to use our small drill bit again, our number 52. Drill through it with a 52 to mark it. And then we can take this off, and then our bolster will have our let me see if I hold this out, drop the stuff. We'll have our 3/16 hole for the pivot, and we'll have, this will be a 52, which we're going to stretch out to a 49 like we did on the liner. And then if you look at the back side of this, we're going to use a 3/8 counter bore on this side of the bolster in order to sink down the head of our pivot to the depth that we desire. Whatever that depth is, it's up to you guys. And you can always go back and make it deeper, you know, later on if you don't like it.
That's a beautiful liner, by the way, or a beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And once we have this in place and this screw in place, since this is tapped, it'll hold itself in place, and we grind the bolster right to the liner to get our perfect fit. Oh, one other thing I forgot. After we drill this 49 hole, we use a number 1 counter bore. I'll show you guys what that looks like. All right, so see how there's a 49 hole, but you see how it's counter bored is so that the socket head fits in there. So we can set it flush. Can you guys see that?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Let me let me grab the counter board to show you guys what the counter board looks like. And I'll show you guys my my folder drawer that I made. If you can zoom on this, I bought this from like Harbor Freight for like $10, and you guys see how I have everything labeled. When you guys start building folders, there's a lot of parts, and you know a lot of them look very similar. So I recommend getting some type of tray that you can have everything have its own place. It's gonna make everything a lot easier. Anyone who's built a folder before, I'm sure will tell you you don't want to mix the parts up.
Yeah, I'm noticing that watching this build. I mean, this is so cool, like breaking it down like we do have one question as we're talking about parts here. Jeff Wilson was asking, what are you using to cut the various parts? You know, you're using very exotic materials, all the zirconium and titanium and things. What are you generally cutting all your parts down with?
Do you guys want to see my high-tech saw?
Yeah, let's see it.
All right, let's walk over. I'm gonna show you guys. It's a portaband in my vise.
There we go. That's the classic.
It's super cheap. You don't need 3-phase, and it's amazing. I mean, the blades are cheap. It cuts right through the titanium, zirconium. It cuts through it like butter. You just want to use a fine tooth, not a coarse tooth.
Mm-hmm. What would you say the investment? Because there's so many pieces of tooling you have to buy. I mean, there's like all those bits and everything.
So roughly, I figured my startup cost, and I've spent more since, but roughly my startup cost and the bits, counter bores, countersinks. Now, I didn't go the cheapest route either. I bought a lot of titanium hardware because I wanted to anodize it. So there's a little cheaper ways to go if you go stainless steel. But I would say roughly you're in the $800 to $1,000 range to make a folder with the tooling and all your materials. So guys, this is the counter bore. All a counter bore is, it's pretty much a drill bit with a pilot on it. And you can find them everywhere. It's a number 1 counter bore. And we use that for a 1x72 socket head screw. That's the screws that we're using to hold the bolster in place, the one under the pivot. And it also holds the scales in place. And the flat heads that I'm using to hold the spacers underneath of the scales, those are also 1x72s. But you can use 2x56. I just use 1x72s because that's what I learned. And real quick, before I forget, I want to tell you guys, this is where I bought a lot of my first stuff. RB Johnson, he's out of Minnesota. You call him, RB answers the phone. So you have any questions, he's a great guy. He's happy to help you. This is where I ordered all my first things. It's got everything you need there to get started. So,
nice.
And you give you a little description of how to make a knife. So.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's a great little heads up. Thanks.
Yeah, and while I'm thinking about it, as far as the spacers go, you don't need to buy spacers. You can also make a spacer. So, like we talked about blade thickness, if we have a 140 blade thickness, we could just make a spacer out of a solid piece of steel or Damascus, make our space at 160. Does that make sense?
Yeah, to allow clearance there for the action.
Exactly. We just always want a minimum of 20 thousandths for the action. We talked about the counter bore for the socket head, and now I have to show you guys the counter bore for the pivot. And a lot of the titanium parts, just so you guys know, I bought from TI Connector. He's on Instagram. Everything he sells is titanium, and he sells all carbide drill bits and counterbores. They're very expensive. Like this, this is a 3/8 counterbore with the 3/16 pilot on it. I think this is like $100, and it's worth getting the good ones. And as you can see, I actually stripped out my lock. It had an Allen key in it. I barely tightened it, and it's stripped out. So I had to re-drill it and re-thread it, and I put a better one in there, so I won't break that now.
Yeah, that one doesn't look like it's gonna break at all.
No, so
You
we
get
made it a
that
little
from the
better.
factory.
No, and then I kept snapping. I don't know if anyone else has built folders, but I kept snapping these 3/16 pilots off, because this is a 3/16 pilot with a 3/32 shank. So there's, and it's hardened, so it's very weak.
Step.
I had that problem with those breaking off, and
I figured out how to fix it.
yeah, tell me.
I ground that down a couple thousandths.
Oh,
I haven't broke one since.
Oh, because it's just binding up in there with friction is what it was. That's what it felt like was happening. Just like
Right, because
hot.
yeah, it's a 3/16 pilot and a 3/16 hole. So I was like,
Right. Okay. Thank
yeah,
you.
it finally made sense. I snapped like 4 of them. Yeah, it was a
Me
nightmare.
too. Me too.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad someone else is in the club. So, and this is also the tool that we use to cut our cage bearings once we start talking about cage bearings. All right, and our cage bearings are on the inside of the liners. Does anyone have questions on the liners or bolsters? We're all good?
Yeah, no, I do have a question on the bolsters, because at no point did you talk about gluing the bolsters together to cut the dovetails. Is that what you do? Because that's what I do.
Would I to cut? You mean to make the angles on here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So once I have both of these drilled to the sizes that I want, what I do is I actually I'll put the pivot in there, and then I'll screw this. I'll put the drill bit. Actually, I put the drill bit in there, a number 51 drill bit, so that it can't move. And then I mark it, and then I grind them both to the same spot while they're together before I round anything, while they're still flat. All right, so next is cage bearings. These cage bearings that I'm using are about 60 thousandths thick. So what we do is we cut each side of that liner to 48 thousandths. So that gives us about 12 thousandths sticking up, making contact with the blade. You guys can see it. And I use my big mill for that. I'm going to show you guys a jig that I made. Actually, I mean, it's Mike Tyree's idea. So I have we made this, and this is how you hold it in the mill. So what we would do, this is the finished one. We're cutting this 3/8 hole to 48 thousandths. So we got these two little hole downs, and I have holes in here. So what I want to do, we're cutting the inside. So I put it over that hole, put this here, and that way, when we tighten this down, this thing's not going anywhere, right? And then I lock it in the mill in the vise, and I come right down in here, and imagine this is in my mill. I raise my table up so I make contact. Then I set it to 0, or if you have a DRO, you set it to 0. Then you cut 48 thousandths in, and that's how we cut our bearing pockets, one at a time, obviously, and make sure you cut it on the right side.
Do you run a DRO on your mill?
I do not.
Yeah.
I just use the regular, I just use the settings that are on there manually.
Yeah,
yeah, like I said, you just put this in, raise your platform up until you're tight on it, start your mill, set it at 0, start your mill, and go to 48 thousandths. And then I'm sure everyone knows this, but on your calibers, there's this little piece on the back of it. Okay, that gives you your depth. So you can always check your depth if you're not sure. Make sure you set it 0. Spin this out. Come over your bearing pocket and bring it down. All right, look at what our gauge is at. You guys see it? Right on the money, 48 thousandths.
Nice.
All right,
So
that's a good way to double check it.
And when you're cutting those, do you just kind of bump down thou by thou sort of thing, or so that you don't overcut? And are you just checking as you go?
That's a good question. My mill is very accurate. You know, the first time you cut them, you should check it. I did the same thing. I stopped a couple times just to confirm that it was cutting the right depth. But yeah, I go from 0 to 48 thousandths. And guys, when you're using these cutters, I was cutting way too fast when I started. I cut it at around 250 to 300 RPM, super slow. If you turn it up too high, you're gonna destroy your $100 carbide cutter.
Luke, is there information for classes on your website?
There is. There's a classes page on there. It says classes, but you know, if someone wants to come make a folder, definitely be willing to teach them.
What's your website? I'll put it in the chat for folks.
It's just my name. It's Luke, Luke, Dellmeyer, DELLMYER.com. All right, guys. So next we're going to our blade. I'm going to show you real quick how we cut the arc into the blade, and that's going to be our start and stop point when the blade's open and closed, obviously. Let me put this knife back together so I can explain it a little bit better. I'm not going to put the scales back on, but let me just piece it together quick for you guys. Just be a second. If anyone has questions while I'm putting it together, feel free to ask. For the sake of time, guys, I'm not going to put the spacers in. But what we would do is we put this all together with the spacers in place. All right. So I'm going to take this off to show you what we're looking for. When this blade is closed, okay, and I don't have my stop pin in because theoretically we don't have one right now if we were making this. This blade can't come down any further than where our spacers end, right? So if I have, just imagine a spacer in here or a back bar. Does that make sense? We don't want this to close all the way where the edge is hitting that spacer every time. We're going to have 3 dull spots on our knife.
Right.
So when we pick where our start and stop point is going to be, we want to make sure that it's not hitting the spacer. And the other thing we want to do is when this blade is open, we don't need this anymore. We need to decide how we want this knife to look when it's open. Do we want it to look like that? Do we want it to look like this? You know, I'm over exaggerating, but where do we want this blade to stop? You know, for permanently. So once we decide where we want this to stop, now imagine this blade still has extra metal out here, extra metal on top, but we're just picturing in our head what we want this slope of this blade to look like. And once we find where we want it, we're going to set this pin first. So I use these for everything, guys. These no twists. Some people like these old airplane vice grips. Some people like vice grips. These are really going to knurl everything up, just so you know, because of the teeth on them. These little 1-inch no twists are the ticket. So what we're going to do is we'll put this on here. Now we don't have a stop pin. We're imagining we don't have a stop pin. All right, we set that where we want it. And then we come over here and we already have our hole in the liner. So we drill through the liner and through the blade to mark where we want that blade to stop when it's open. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So we'll have an 1/8 inch hole, or I'm sorry, 3/32 hole here now, right where my finger's at. And once we get that hole, then we close this to where it's not hitting the spacers, right? So we close this blade to where we know it's not hitting the spacers. and then we clamp it again. All right, so we'll have this clamp on here. Now I know I'm hitting the spacer, but in theory we're not gonna be. All right, guys. So we have that so the blade's not hitting. And then we flip it over and we drill our second hole. So that's our start and stop point. Does that make sense?
Totally. So that arc for the start and stop pins, that's the same pattern on all your blades. It's just the placement of those pins that dictates the angle of the blade coming out.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just controlling the angle of the blade out of the handle. And it's also controlling how far it closes. If you drill this too far, it's going to close every time and hit your spacers. If you go way too far, you can't correct it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So once we have our two holes, then we have to cut the arc. So I'm going to show you guys how we cut the arc. We just have to go into another room for it. We're going to use the big mill. I set that up for you guys. This is the big mill. This is one that we rebuilt. And this is a jig I made, guys. All this is a block of aluminum, 3/16 drill bit that I broke off. So I drilled a hole a little bit smaller, and I hammered that in place. So now I have that's my 3/16 pivot, right? So that fit, my knife will fit right on that pivot hole, right? That's our pivot. And then what I do is I come up. Now imagine we don't have this arc. We have a hole up here. I come up here, I line up my hole, right? All right, so I line up to the first hole, and I drill down. And once I have it started, I rotate this. All right, so I drill it all the way down at the top till it hits the aluminum. I hold my fingers here and I just walk this slowly. Can you guys see it?
Totally.
And I walk it all the way across. Right, and make sure you keep it flat with your fingers all the way until you hit the end of your second drill hole. But you don't want to go any further, because remember, that's where we're gonna get into the issue of hitting our spacers on the frame, right? So you want to stop right at the top of that hole. And that's it. Lift our mill up. Get this off. Take it out. Does that make sense, guys?
Totally. Is there any danger as you're cutting that? Have you ever had them want to jump at all?
You know, I haven't. I run this pretty fast because we're cutting high carbon. So we want to run a higher speed, you know, probably run around 1800 RPMs. And I usually have someone in the shop with me. I have them blowing air on it to keep from the millings getting built up under the blade.
Right.
But I've never had an issue. No, nothing scary happened to me yet.
All right.
But obviously you got to be careful not to get your fingers into the cutter.
Right. What size bit are you used for cutting the arc? Did you say that was what size was the hole you were cutting for your pins?
I'm using a 1/8. I'm using an 1/8 inch cutter, and I'm using a 3/32 stop pin. Gives me a little extra room. And once I have my arc cut, then I put my stop pin in, which I already have fit the size. I can get it in there. All right, and then we check it. Now my lock's already cut, guys, so the lock's in place and it's open to where I want it to be open. And when I close it, I have enough clearance that's not hitting any of the spacers.
Nice.
All right, and then I'll open it back up just to check, make sure everything looks good. Now remember, we're gonna have a lot of extra back here, guys. This blade's done, so we might have steel coming all the way out to here. All right, and what I try to do is I chase this. Next thing we're gonna do is cut an 8-degree slope on the back of this blade so that the lock can slide into place once our lock is cut. And I try to bring this right up as close as I can to that arc. You can even go into the arc, it's not a huge deal. But I try to leave a little bit of meat there just so it's stronger. So next thing I'll do is I'll go to the grinder, and I'll grind all this, I'll grind off the bulk of it. And then I'll come back and I'll cut my 8-degree lockup in. And I'm gonna show you how we cut the 8 degrees in, or how I do it anyway. So I have an angle finder. I turn it on. All right. And we're gonna change that to 8 degrees. So roughly we're gonna get 8 degrees on there. All right. Close enough for the demo, 8 degrees. Push our work rest up to our belt. Then we would put our blade on there, and we just keep walking it in until we get to the depth that we want. And it cuts that perfect 8-degree slope. If you can see the, I don't know if the camera can focus good enough on this slope. But you just want a little bit of slope here.
Oh yeah.
So that the lock can slide into place from the spring tension.
I see.
Yeah,
Otherwise, there's too much friction for it to make that 90-degree corner.
Exactly. We want it to be able to. We want that lock bar to slide down into place and get wedged in, so it can't come out. Make sense?
Yeah.
Anyone have questions?
That makes perfect sense.
Okay. All right, guys. So the next thing we're gonna do is imagine that this lock wasn't cut in. All right. Actually, we can use one of these fake ones just for the demo. All right. So we're gonna imagine that that blade is at our lock point. You know, where we have our stop pin at. That's where it's sitting. Next thing we're gonna do, we need to cut our lock in place. So I take a scribe. This is obviously locked into place. We can put a clamp on it so it doesn't move if you want to. Then we're gonna scribe that line that we have on here. All right. Take our blade off. You guys see this mark here? Can you guys see it?
Oh, yep.
All right, that is the perfect lockup right there. So we don't want to cut it right at that line. We want to cut it up here, say 1/16 of an inch above that, and then file it down from there. So always cut heavy past the line, because if you cut your lock too short, there's nothing you can do to fix it.
Can't put it back.
Right. So I usually cut that with a bandsaw. I'll go right into the bandsaw, and I'll cut right above it here. And then what we do after we cut it on the bandsaw, we grab a popsicle stick. I'll usually put in my vise here. And our spring's already bent. But I put a popsicle stick back here so I can get to it to file it down to the height that we need it to take off the excess. The popsicle stick, if you take an angle from this way, it just holds it out of the way so that you can get to it with the file. Let me grab the blade. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry, guys. I missed a step. After we cut this in here, like I said, we cut it with the bandsaw, a little heavy. Next thing we need to do is cut our lock bar. I'm sorry, I forgot that. The lock bar, we want to cut it like around 2 1/4 inches long. Is usually nice length. Okay. I drill a 1/16 inch hole here, a 1/16 inch hole here for a start and stop point. And then the way I do it, you can put it in your mill. You can cut it with the mill. That's the easy way to do it. You put a 16th inch bit here, 16th inch bit here. Then you can put risers under it to rise it up and cut it with a cutter on the mill. But if you don't have a mill, this is a quick way to do it. I put it right here on my table. And when I first started, I put a guide bar on right across it. Then I take a Dremel, and these discs are awesome. These are actually for dental work. They're for cutting titanium. If you guys try to use the little Dremel discs that we all use, you're gonna go through about 8 of them. These are a lot more expensive, but they work amazingly well.
Does it say Pyrex on it?
Where do you get those?
Oh, dang.
I ordered them from eBay. A 20-pack is about $68.
Renfert.
Well worth it.
Yeah, I cut a couple with the old discs, and it was a nightmare. I was changing them every 3 seconds. But then what I do is I just come in here, and then I cut this lock in all the way across. And then once we have that cut across, then we put the popsicle stick in, and we follow this down until it locks the blade in place.
And then do you have a set degree for how you put that bend in?
You know, I don't have a set degree. I just bend it with my hand until it just breaks. The top of it kind of breaks flush on the frame, on the liner, and that's usually about perfect. And then, like I said, we were taking these things apart 100 times. Then you just have to play with the amount of adjustment on it until it locks up nice. Because the lockup we're shooting for, you don't want it to lock up 100%. You want it to be like, you know, between 30, right around 30% is ideal.
Okay.
Can you guys see how much is locking up there?
And why is that? Is it harder to for the action to disengage if it's engaged, if that lock is engaged more?
Exactly. And if it's not enough, obviously if you bang it, it's going to close on your fingers.
Right.
But as you can see, it's a lot of take apart and put back together. You guys see I'm putting all this back together. I'm going to put our spacers in. Getting everything to line up too takes a little hand-eye coordination as well. Getting all these little screws and spacers, and
that's the whole game with these ones, is everything lining up, huh?
Yeah, for sure. But you guys can see how everything's going back together. I leave the spacers loose until they're all together, obviously, or you can't get them in. All right, and then we need to take this bolster off on this side in order to finish cutting the lock. Now that it's all together.
Joe is asking, Joe Elliott's asking, when cutting your lock bar with the disc and you stop at the pre-drilled hole, there would still be some uncut material on the underside. How do you get that last little bit out of there?
I should have said that. You just flip it over.
Oh, okay. And just do the other side.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, you're only gonna have like a 1/16 of an inch there left over.
Right.
But yeah, just flip the liner. All right, guys, so the whole knife is assembled again. And, you know, we're pretending that this isn't locked in place. We would put this in the vise. I put the popsicle stick behind it. I keep following this down until I can pull this out. You can see the tension in there.
Good strong lock.
Yeah, it is. This is why you put it in the vise. There we go. And you keep following that until when you pick it up, the blade falls into place where you want it to.
Nice.
And we play with that bend. You remember how you asked me how we know how much bend?
Yeah.
You have to keep disassembling this to bend this that way because it's in the way of this liner. So there's
Right.
a couple back and forth with that as well.
You just kind of like bend it a little, bend it back kind of thing.
Right. Until we have a good lockup.
Yeah.
And then once we have our lockup set, we would take the bolster off on this side as well. And then what we do is we rubber band this shut so that the blade can't move. And then we're going to drill our detent ball. That's a number 53, and it's a 16th inch detent. So once we drill this, we take this liner off again, and we would put our ball over the hole. And I usually just put it on the anvil, and I use a little ball peen, and I hammer that ball into about halfway. And that usually works pretty well. A lot of guys use a press also to get it more exact. I just kind of play with it. I hammer it in, and then if it feels like it's not enough, I'll tap it a little bit more. But you drill through the liner. I didn't say this. You drill through the liner with a 53, and it goes into the blade too. And that ball is what creates this blade from falling out when you shake it. You can see it as it gets close to the end. You watch it suck in. That ball falls into the hole into the blade. And it's also what makes it flip, the tension on that ball, which once we put it back together, you can see the tension. And now it's just reassembly. Do you guys want to see me put it all back together and see it work?
Yeah.
Or do you guys want to see
you
have time?
I have a question, Luke.
Sure.
So at this point, now that you have the detent in place, the detent is going to lift the liner up on the back side a little bit. Do you go in and relieve some material off the outside of that lock bar, or do you leave the liner itself? I mean, the scale itself.
I do.
Which one do you
see,
do?
I remove the back of the lock bar. See how it tapers down?
Right. That's what I was wondering. Okay.
Yeah. So what I do is I measure the thickness of the material, which we know is point. This one was 0.65. And then once I set the detent ball, that's usually it comes up around like 0.94. So I subtract the difference from 0.65 to 0.94. Say it's say that's say it's 30 thousandths, roughly 25 thousandths.
Okay.
I put a 25 thousandth spacer under here, and I use the same hold down device that I made. And with that 25 thousandth spacer, I mill it off.
That's kind of cool.
Does that make sense?
You actually use the mill though?
Yeah, I use a 1/4 inch mill.
Okay, because I've been putting mine on the surface grinder and taking a shim that is the thickness, like a 5,000th shim, underneath not Like, so I basically lift it up and put it on that. But I've been doing steel though. See, with titanium, you couldn't do it.
Yeah, I don't know how you'd hold it with the titanium.
I don't know either. I'm just, yeah, because I've been doing mine, my liners. I haven't really done, except for the ones I made with Bing. I've been using this 15N20 for the liner material instead of titanium.
Yeah, yeah, that's
So,
a good question. If you could find a way to hold it, that'd work awesome. I mean, for steel, it
yeah,
probably
I've
works
been
great.
surface grinding mine with just a little fixture underneath there, a little shim. But that's cool. That was my question. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. But like I said, I use this so it doesn't wiggle around too much as well. Let me finish putting that back. Does anyone else have any other questions? Anything I missed?
Tom Moss is asking what size that detent ball was again. He's putting together a parts list.
It's 1/16. All right, guys. So for the flip, we'll usually adjust how the action is the tension on your pivot. So I usually tighten it all the way up, and I go like a half a turn back on each side to start, and we'll see how it opens. And it opens pretty good, falls in place pretty nice.
Beautiful.
And on my flippers, I don't like having the flipper in the way. It's really nice the way that I learned. The flipper's on top, but barely. See how small the flipper is?
Oh yeah.
It's not huge, but you see how it takes nothing to open this? You don't need a big flipper, and then it's not in the way underneath.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Nice.
that's the whole
Some
hand.
of those flippers can kind of stick out pretty far.
Yeah, they can get kind of crazy.
Yeah, it almost looks like a 6-gun hammer or something sticking off the side of the.
Yeah, exactly. So does anyone have any questions on any of that? Next thing we're gonna do is I was gonna jewel one of these liners, one of the ones that's not done, and then we'll anodize it to show you the last two steps. Does that sound good?
We do have one question from Joe Elliott. He's asking, when you snap the head off one of those itty bitty bolts, how do you get that? How do you extract the broken part out?
Very carefully if you can.
Yeah.
You know, I haven't done it yet, so I don't really know how to answer that. But
If you're using titanium, you put the whole thing in acid and acid eat the bolt out.
muriatic, right, Dave?
Muriatic, yeah, and it'll eat it away. That's how you remove taps and little bits like that, because titanium is impervious. So if it's
Okay.
broken off in there, you just put it in some acid until you can just knock it out.
It'll take like what, a couple hours, right? Something like that.
Yeah. I mean, the stuff's pretty awesome if you make it strong enough. So
Yeah, someone told me that. I've never done it, so I didn't want to say, but
hope to never have to do it.
yeah.
That's the hope.
That's a good trick. Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome.
All right. So we're gonna use Kratex. It's like a hard rubber, guys. It's a polishing compound, and just made this little holder with a set screw to hold it in place. And I put it in the drill, and you guys will see what it does. So then all we do is just this is called jeweling. See how it puts all the nice little swirls in there?
Yeah. That's awesome. I always wondered how they did that.
Yeah, it gives it a really cool look.
Oh, Jeff Wilson's saying if you want to go real old fashioned, you stick a wooden dowel in there and then put the rouge on there. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Old school trick. Rochelle is asking what your polishing material that you put in there is called again?
It's called Kratex, Kratex. And I bought this from MSC. It's a 1/4 inch. And it's the coarse.
Nice.
I mean, when you anodize it, it just really makes it. Not that you see a whole lot of it, but the little bit that catches your eye on the
Oh,
insides
it's
of the liner,
beautiful. It's beautiful, man. That's so
it sure
cool.
is.
Yeah, that's nice. Beautiful.
All right. So guys, next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna anodize it. There's a multi-etch for titanium that you can use to clean it in, but it takes like 5 or 10 minutes. But there's also, just in my anodizing solution, there's this stuff, which also is a cleaner as well.
Nice.
Okay, so we're just gonna anodize this piece how it is. I might just wipe it down with some alcohol real fast, and then we'll anodize, and I'll show you guys some colors.
Awesome. Quick question from Anthony. Do you jewel the sides ever? Like if you have a really thick liner material, would you ever jewel the sides of it?
I'm confused. What do you mean drill the sides?
Sorry, jewel. Is that what you called it when you did the polish?
Oh, jewel the sides. I'm sorry, I misheard you. I haven't done it, but you could jewel anything you want. I mean, it'd probably look pretty cool.
Yeah.
And like on, especially if you did like a frame lock, where it's like you said, it'd be a lot thicker material.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys do barking. I don't know if you guys have seen any of the barking.
Mm-mm.
So this is like, I'll show you on this knife I made with a friend of mine. You see how the texture on that?
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
So that's called barking. And they just use a real low speed with a small wheel at 36 grit, like a brand new 36 grit, as slow as your grinder can go. And then you can anodize that as well, but it's super cool.
So you're just scratching it basically.
Exactly. But
That's
it gives
cool.
a really neat finish, yeah. But you can do something like that as well.
And you get to use your 36 grit belt for something other than hogging.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. All right, guys. So the anodizer, stainless steel is the charge with the ground, with the positive onto our liner. Don't put your fingers in the water. You turn this on, and we'll go through some colors. Let's see what it does.
So is this going to be something where there's a gradient that you're working through, and it's like how much you do changes the color?
Exactly. So let's see. We hardly have anything in it right now. Let's see if it does anything. Can you guys see it in there?
Yep.
All right. So you see it's a little darker.
Yeah.
See how we have like a purple?
Ooh, cool.
All right, now we're going a little longer. See this? It's going from a purple to a blue to a yellow.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, wherever the clip is, the color doesn't change. So once you have the color you like, I usually grab it from the reverse end to even out the colors on it.
And then would you just dunk up to where the blue is, or would you dunk the whole thing? Because it would,
Yeah.
to even
Let me
it
show
out.
you. Yeah, watch. We'll go like this. We'll dunk the whole thing. Ready? See how quick it changed?
Oh wow, yeah, wild. That was super fast. Oh,
So I
because
don't know why it does that, but wherever that clip is, it doesn't like to change until you flip it.
okay. Oh yeah, right.
You see how it's nice equal blue now?
Yeah. Yeah, it must be something that I see. Yeah, Billy's saying you can dunk the whole thing. It's the voltage that regulates color. So now that you're up to this specific voltage, it's just going to take everything to that color because you set that voltage.
Exactly.
So it won't take it past it. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of rundown on it.
That was a cool process. I've never seen that done before.
Yeah, and then we'll do, we'll anodize all our spacers and and our clip. And you obviously you can do whatever color you'd like.
Yeah, that is cool.
You can get the greens too. The higher we go, get the green.
What's the what's like? Is there a ceiling?
It's 120 volts on this machine.
Okay.
And
what
I think that's the green.
Okay.
But yeah, I bought this from Reactive Metals. They sell you everything you need, like a starter kit, pretty much. I think it's around $230.
Oh, that's not
But
bad.
it has everything you need except for the distilled water.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Anthony's asking, does the anodizing, how easy is it for the anodizing to wear off? Because that is just a surface coating on there.
It is. From what I understand, it stays very well.
Cool.
I've had a couple pocket knives that a friend of mine made that were anodized, and I've had no issues with it wearing off. Like Dave said earlier, I just started making these. I'm about 6 deep on these folding knives, so
Wow.
obviously I haven't had any issues with it.
Yeah.
I think if the anodization was on the exterior on the whole scale, maybe you'd see more wearing, but most of mine is just the inside of the liner.
Oh, right. Joe Elliott is likening that anodizing machine to a fancy battery charger.
Well, there is other ways to do it, that's for sure. I mean, I know Mike had just as you can buy them on eBay for like $50, $80. It's just a voltage, like you pretty much, like he said, it just regulates voltage, and then you have to buy all the the clamps and stuff, and it's a big deal to buy the stainless steel and all the solutions. But you can definitely do it. It's not as accurate.
Right. You can't dial it straight through the colors like you can.
Right. It's just kind of you're watching it until it's what you like, and then you're done. And you can also heat color titanium too. Dave probably knows more about that than I do, but I know you can heat color titanium. It's just not as easily, as accurate.
And will it run the same color gradient if you heat color it?
I believe so. Yeah, I haven't done it, but I believe it's the same thing. I just don't know. You know how like when you blue steel, you can miss those colors pretty quick.
Yeah.
I don't know if titanium's that way or not.
You can color the titanium with just a light flame on your torch, but it is not the consistent color he just got. Yeah, it's there's always a little bit of variance, which can be nice too. And I don't
There
know
you
how
go.
durable it is. Like that looks durable, and everything I've seen with the anodizing machine for $200, I think I would just get one of those.
Right. No kidding. That thing's awesome.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I thought it'd be way more. And just talking about machines, you guys made me realize that Dave told me I should touch on something that I forgot to, was carbonizing the end of the lock. I knew I was going to forget something.
Uh-huh.
When we cut the lock on the liner, I have the knife together already, but where the cut is, where it locks up to the blade, where this meets the blade, we carbonize it. So we actually like micro weld carbides onto it. And if you guys want, I can show it to you. It'll take about a minute.
Let's do it.
Let's see it.
All right. All right, so it's pretty high tech. I use my etching machine and a $10 Dremel tool.
Huh.
So this is a Dremel engraver. Comes with a carbide tip on it already, so you don't need to buy anything. Plug that in, and then I set up my name, my electro mark. The one that I have, you can pull this off.
Oh, yeah.
The wand, and I just got an alligator clip and bent the end so it fits into the other end of it.
Okay.
So now I have my positive and my ground with alligator clips. All right, and we clamp. This is a piece of titanium. I clamp the positive onto there, the negative onto the carbide or the Dremel.
Ha.
I turn this on, and then we I gotta turn the machine on. I gotta turn the machine on, guys. Sorry. Turn your mark on first. All right. And then we come in here. And we micro weld carbide onto the lock.
Oh
So
my gosh.
that's so cool.
So why is it important to do that?
If we don't do that, our titanium will wear out.
Mm.
Eventually, not that it'll necessarily wear out, but it'll wear down, and then the blade, the lockup won't be tight.
The
All
lock,
that,
it changes the lockup.
yeah, all that time we spent, you're gonna have some play in it eventually.
You set the machine on mark.
On
only?
mark, you said?
Yeah, I set it on etch. On mine has AC and DC.
Uh-huh.
I set it on etch on DC,
Oh, okay.
And
Etch.
and I keep it about halfway.
Perfect. Well, hey, that was a wonderful demo. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
man.
much, man.
Thank you.
All
We
right, folks.
appreciate you a lot.
Thank you.